how does the current government under Lee, who's just been elected, compare to Yoon in terms of China policy?
If you were China, you'd certainly want the one they've got now. Yoon was very good on policy, foreign policy. He understood that China is no friend of South Korea's, nor is North Korea. And he did a very good job of sort of rebuilding relations with the United States that had suffered during the Moon Jae-in, the previous leftist administration. And Yoon also made a very sort of a nice gesture to sort of repair the relationship with the Japanese. And they did a good job of that, so that you had much better cooperation on the foreign policy defense fronts with Japan than there had been. You had the South Korean military, the Japanese military, and the U.S. military getting out and operating together. And they used to do that, actually, but the leftists tried to put a stop to all this. But Yoon repaired things, fixed things. And South Korea was playing a sort of a bigger role in the region. And this is all in doubt now. In fact, it's unlikely that it's going to continue. And the U.S. had been pressing for years for the South Koreans and the Japanese to just get along. And they finally were having some success. But to give you an idea of how it's going to be, though it may take a little bit, but not so long, when President Yoon was first impeached, the very first impeachment notice, or the charges, they said that he had antagonized North Korea, China, and Russia, and had a sort of obscenely pro-Japan foreign policy, something like that. And so they're saying, well, we actually don't want to. We want to placate China, Russia, North Korea, and we don't want to have a good relationship with the Japanese. Well, this is like telling the Americans, well, everything you want, we're against. In fact, we want to be like your enemies. It is about that bad. And so if you listen to what these people say, the current president of South Korea, Lee Jae-myung, elected however he was, he has described the U.S. forces as an occupying force. He has said that previously that, well, give China what they want when it comes to Taiwan. He has some of his top advisors, one who said that, well, COVID came from America.
Oh, that level of crazy.
It is. And there's a long list of people that he's put into positions who are like that. So, his current prime minister, for example, was served 3 years in jail back in the 80s for anti-state or anti-South Korea, pro-North Korea activities. He was part of the illegal occupation of the U.S. Cultural Center in Seoul back then. And it's not as if he's changed his stripes at all. These people still think that. And these are the guys that he's put one after the other. These are the sorts of people he's staffed his administration with. While the foreign press says, well, he's a centrist because he said that the U.S. relationship is important and we need to get along with the Japanese. Well, he said it, therefore he's a centrist. But it overlooks and it just ignores everything else he has done up to this point in life. And appointing these people really is a provocation towards the U.S., but it gives you a good sense of what's coming and just how hard it will be to sort of maintain the relationship as it's been. I imagine the U.S. side will probably try to ignore it as they've routinely done, but they may find that they're not able to.
So what?
Yeah, I was going to say, do you think there's a recognition within the U.S. government of what's happening in South Korea?
I don't know. There's always been people who understand. There always have. But they've never really had the authority or the ability to do much about it. Instead, what we do is we try to pretend there's nothing wrong. And I think we may find that that's what we're doing, just try to make the best of it, hope somehow we get through it and something works out without knowing exactly how, instead of just speaking up clearly, for our interests and also for our friends in South Korea. The majority of people who don't want this. And we could at least put in, for example, a favorable word or favorable reference to honest elections. You'd think that this administration of any of them would have done that, would have been very helpful to the people who were in the streets trying to ensure that there was a fair vote that took place. But I think there has been a fundamental failure on the part of successive U.S. administrations to understand the nature of Korean leftists. And I don't think anyone's done it very well ever. And these people do mean what they say. So with the current administration, right after the election in June, the White House put out a notice within like 36 hours saying they congratulated President Lee Jae-myung, and they noted that the election was a free and fair election. Within 36 hours, without examining the evidence, well, if they could tell me who's going to win the Super Bowl next year, they ought to. But that's what they did, and that was a gut punch, really, to the Koreans who wanted something different. The State Department did a little better. They congratulated, and then they said they were concerned about Chinese influence in the election and in elections. And that was that sort of vague statement. But that's about what the U.S. government, this administration, did to deal on this. And as I said, sometimes all you have to do is speak up. And that tends to give some oxygen to the people who want a clean, honest, free country. And elections to go with that. And if you don't do that, well, the other side sees, well, no matter what abuse we heap on people and on the U.S., well, they're just going to congratulate us, and things will move along. So they have an opportunity now, even still, but it would have been better to have, as I said, spoken up earlier, and even just say a favorable reference, a good word for honest elections would have been something useful. But no administration has done this very well to date. And instead you hear ironclad alliance, et cetera, and you find that military people on the U.S. side who have traditionally only deal with South Korean military, they tend to think that, well, they're all like us. They're all like that. And the military types are pro-America, of course, and pro-honest government, although the leftists have tried to pressure them and bring them to heel as well. But we have not really understood the risks to South Korea to date. And I've mentioned before that Venezuela is a good example if you want to see how this can play out, because it's often not remembered that for many years, the U.S.-Venezuela relationship was probably the strongest one with any country in South America. The Venezuelan military was very pro-U.S. We had deep relationships. It was often referred to as the oldest democracy in Latin America. And yet Hugo Chavez gets elected, and within a matter of years, now they're our biggest enemy, and they hate us. And you've got millions of people left the country. And how could that have happened? But it did. And you find something similar that at least needs to be considered as a possibility with South Korea, that despite the strong relationship we've had, despite the existing strength in that relationship, that there's no reason why it has to continue like that. You couldn't find it very troubled before too long. So one shouldn't think that that's impossible, even with South Korea.
Does it make sense strategically for the U.S. government to avoid antagonizing the current South Korean government with the hopes that this will lead to better cooperation in the future?
Well, that's always the thinking, is where we don't want to get them mad. It'll just make it worse. It was the same thing that was said about Robert Mugabe when he was slaughtering 20,000 Matabele. Well, we don't want to say anything, and we can't quite prove it because it'll just make it worse.
Thank you for watching this clip. There's a lot more, so I invite you to visit our website, ChinaUncensored.tv, where you can watch the full hour-long interview, plus get MP3 downloads of our podcast. The link is below.